I remember the exact moment everything started because I had just finished washing the dishes and was drying my hands when my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. And when I looked down, I saw my mother's name on the screen, even though she had been buried 3 years ago. And for a second, I thought maybe I was just seeing things because I hadn't slept well the night before. But the notification didn't disappear, and the message icon stayed there like it was waiting for me to react. I picked up the phone slowly and stared at it for a few seconds before unlocking it. And when I opened the message, I saw that it was a voice recording sent just seconds earlier. And I checked the number twice to make sure it wasn't someone else saved under her name. But it was the exact same number I used to call her when she was alive. I pressed play while standing in the middle of the kitchen, and her voice came through clearly, calm and steady like I remembered. And she said, "If you hear this message, do not open the door under any circumstances." And then the recording ended abruptly, like she had been cut off. I stood there without moving and replayed it again, just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. And the words stayed the same, direct and specific. And it didn't sound like an old recording or something taken from somewhere else, because the tone felt recent and deliberate. I told myself it had to be a prank or some kind of technical glitch. And I even checked the date and time on the message, which showed it had been sent less than a minute ago. And that detail made my hands stop moving because there was no logical explanation for it. I walked toward the front door slowly because I had already been heading there before the message arrived. And when I reached it, I realized my hand was already on the handle, as if my body had continued the motion without waiting for my mind to catch up. I stood there for a moment and looked at the door, then looked back at the phone screen, and I let go of the handle while trying to convince myself that I was overreacting to something that didn't make sense. I even laughed quietly to break the tension and said out loud that it was probably a joke from someone who had access to old recordings. And I tried to act normal by putting the phone down on the small table near the door. Before I could step away, the phone vibrated again with another voice message from the same number, and I felt my attention snap back instantly because whatever this was, it wasn't stopping. I picked it up again and pressed play without thinking too much this time, and her voice came through again, slightly faster, and she said, "I am not the one outside." And the message ended immediately after that. I didn't move, and I didn't speak, and I didn't even look toward the door at first, because I was trying to process what that sentence meant in a real-world situation where things are supposed to follow rules. Then I heard the first knock on the door, and it was clear and firm, not loud enough to seem aggressive, but not soft enough to ignore. And it came exactly 2 seconds after the message finished playing. I turned my head slowly and looked directly at the door. And before I could take a step, I heard my mother's voice from the other side saying my name the same way she used to when she wanted my attention. And then she said, "Open the door. I missed you." I stepped back without realizing it and held the phone tighter, and I looked down at the screen again, as if expecting another message to appear. And part of me was waiting for something to confirm what I was hearing. Another knock followed immediately, slightly louder this time, and the voice repeated my name with a softer tone. And it sounded so accurate that it made it difficult to separate memory from what was actually happening outside. I moved away from the door and walked into the living room, but I didn't take my eyes off the hallway that led back to the entrance, and I kept the phone in my hand, like it was the only thing giving me some kind of direction. The phone vibrated again, and I almost dropped it because it happened at the exact same moment the knocking stopped. And when I looked down, I saw another message waiting. I opened it and pressed play immediately, and her voice said, "If you love me, don't open." And there was a slight pause before the recording ended, as if she had been trying to say more, but didn't have time. I stood there in silence, holding the phone close, while the house felt unusually still, and I could hear my own footsteps echo slightly from when I had moved back. Then the knocking started again, but this time it was more urgent and repeated quickly, and the voice outside said my name again, followed by "Please, don't leave me out here." And the tone sounded strained, like someone trying to sound convincing under pressure. I took a few steps toward the hallway without deciding to do it consciously, and I found myself halfway between the living room and the door, caught between the messages in my hand and the voice outside. I looked down at the phone one more time, as if it could give me a final answer, but the screen stayed still with no new messages. And that silence made the decision feel heavier, because now it was entirely on me. I turned my head toward the door again, and the knocking slowed down, and the voice outside said quietly, "It's cold, please." And that detail made the situation feel more physical and immediate. I walked closer until I was standing a few steps away from the door, and I could see the handle again, and I noticed my hand lifting slightly like it was about to reach for it. I tightened my grip on the phone and tried to remember the exact wording of the last message, and I repeated it in my head carefully, focusing on every word. I took one more step forward and stopped just short of the door, and I stood there listening to the silence that followed the last knock. That's when I thought it was over. I had no idea what was about to happen next. I stayed in front of the door for a few seconds longer, and when no new knocks came, I turned slightly as if I was about to walk away. But then I heard a faint movement outside, like someone shifting their weight very close to the door. I leaned in without touching it and listened carefully, and I could hear slow breathing from the other side, steady and controlled, like someone deliberately staying quiet. I stepped back again and looked down at my phone, and I opened the contact details of my mother's number to check if anything had changed. But everything looked exactly the same as it always had. I scrolled through old messages and saw years of normal conversations ending the week she passed away. And then nothing until the 3 new voice messages from tonight. And that gap made the current situation feel even more unnatural. Another soft knock came, just once this time, followed by her voice again, saying my name in a lower tone. And then she added, "You're scaring me by not opening," which sounded like something she would have said when I ignored her as a child. I moved closer again and stopped right in front of the door, and I raised my hand slowly toward the handle while staring at it like it might move on its own. I told myself that there had to be a logical explanation involving someone using recordings or trying to trick me. And I tried to focus on that idea instead of the details that didn't fit. The voice outside spoke again, slightly louder, and said, "I know you're there." And then the handle moved slightly, as if someone tested it from the outside, even though it was locked. I pulled my hand back quickly and took a step away. And I looked around the room as if expecting to see someone else inside. But everything was exactly where it should be. The phone vibrated again, and this time the message came in while the voice outside was still speaking. And that overlap made it impossible to ignore either one. I opened the message immediately, and her voice sounded more urgent than before. And she said, "Do not open. They already got in once." And the sentence ended abruptly like the previous ones. I looked up instantly toward the hallway and then back toward the door. And I realized that I had not checked any other part of the house since this started. And that detail changed how I saw the entire situation. I turned away from the door and walked quickly toward the bedroom area. And I checked each room one by one, pushing doors open and looking inside. But everything appeared empty and undisturbed. When I reached the bathroom, I noticed the small window above the sink was slightly open even, though I clearly remembered closing it earlier. And the curtain moved slightly with the air coming through. I stepped closer and looked outside, and the alley behind the house was empty and quiet, with no movement or sound. I closed the window firmly and turned back toward the hallway. And as I did, I heard the front door open behind me with a slow, clear sound of the lock shifting. I froze for a second and then walked back quickly. And when I reached the living room, I saw the front door slightly open, moving inward just enough to create a narrow gap. I stared at it without moving, and then it opened wider on its own, as if pushed gently from the outside, and the hallway light fell across the floor in a thin strip. No one stepped in immediately, and the silence that followed felt deliberate, like whoever was outside was waiting for me to react. Then I heard the same voice again, but this time it came from just outside the doorframe, and it said my name softly, followed by "I told you to open." And the tone sounded different now, less like a request and more like a statement. I took a step back and held the phone up instinctively, and I looked at the screen, hoping for another message, but nothing came this time. the door opened fully, and a woman stepped inside slowly, wearing my mother's coat and standing at the exact height I remembered. But when she lifted her head, the face didn't match, and the expression was completely unfamiliar. She closed the door behind her carefully and looked directly at me. And then she spoke, using her own voice, saying, "You should have listened to the message," while holding my mother's phone in her hand. I looked down at my own phone immediately, and the screen went dark, as if it had lost power, and I realized too late that the messages had been sent to keep me away from the door, not to protect me from what was outside. She took a step closer, and I backed into the wall behind me with no space left to move. And I understood in that moment that the unlocked window had been the way she entered earlier while I was in the kitchen. The last thing I saw before everything went still was her placing my phone on the table near the door, exactly where I had left it before all of this started, as if resetting the scene for someone else to find. One last question: if you were in her place at that moment, would you have done the same? Be honest. What does her choice deserve out of 10? Subscribe now. The best story is coming next.